Hi there, I'm Jennie George. It's with much regret that I can't share the very important occasion with you this morning, but I'm really pleased that I've had the opportunity to prepare this video to mark a very significant event in the history of our union. I would ask you to close your eyes and think back 50 years, because what happened in my time is quite different to the challenges facing women in the Federation today. So this morning I'm going to go through a little bit about my history, my involvement with the Federation, and then with the broader union movement at the ACTU, to talk about some of my reflections, some of the highs and lows, and some of the challenges that I think face the union in future years. So I'm sorry I can't be with you. Just a warning, just be careful when you get to my age that you look after your bones, because breaking both my ankles has left me with very restricted mobility, and that's the reason I can't be with you. But I'm there with you all in spirit. I know you're going to have a great day. I'm looking forward to the publication outlining the history of 100 fantastic women in our union, and I hope you enjoy the rest of what I have to say this morning. Thank you. Well, starting at the beginning, you should know that I came to Australia in 1950. A lot of emphasis these days on the plight of asylum seekers and refugees. It's a big issue. My mum and dad came here at the end of the war, the Second World War, in 1950, and they came under a United Nations program. So everything that I've achieved in my life owes a lot to the opportunities that a good education system gave families like ours. It was a land of opportunity. My parents wanted to escape the trauma of the Second World War, and they looked to go to the furthest place on earth, which from Europe was Australia. And so we were very fortunate to arrive here. I spent my early years in migrant hostels and then later in public housing. We had a tough time. My parents worked in different places, and I stayed with my grandmother for my formative years. Then we came together as a family when I began my schooling at Burwood Central School in those days. It was a great school. I didn't learn English until I went to school, and of course there was no ESL teaching in those days. So public schooling has been the big constant in my life. I love school, I love the teachers, I loved mixing with other students, being an only child. And I did well at school, so that gave me a sense of achievement. And I think the really important thing was that my mother in particular valued the importance of education. I think I'm quite typical of migrant families where the parents face all the hardships, and it's the next generation that I think stand to benefit from those opportunities. So I got very involved with the union at Bankstown Girls High. I became the union rep, the Fed rep. And in those days we had quite a bit of a campaign around staffing shortages. I was very angry. I was teaching level 1 history, the year 12 class, and some junior classes as well, but the year 12 English class was going through a series of changes in the teachers that were sent to the school. They'd come and go, and then someone else would come along and not stay very long. And I thought this was really poor form, because the students were due to sit for their exam at the end of the year and were missing out on a qualified teacher. So we organised a big parent meeting and sent in our protests and our demands to the Education Department, to the Federation. That put the staffing issue very much on the map for the region, because it wasn't just Bankstown Girls that was doing without qualified teachers. Other schools were in the same position. It was at the time that the union first formed regional associations. So that was something new for the Federation. We devolved responsibility at the regional level, and I had a great organiser, Richard Walsham, who inspired a lot of people to be active in the union. I'd already had some connection with the union because while I was studying to become a teacher, I was active in the Trainee Teachers Club, and we had protests about the inadequacy of our scholarships. We were involved not just in organising at the university, but we also had our regular trainee teacher meetings. We had our own journal, and I had my own column. It was called Jennie's Jottings, as I recall. So I'd had a bit of a taste of activity with the union, but it wasn't until I got involved with the Canterbury-Bankstown Association, which I think is still in existence, and hopefully still doing good deeds, that my interest in the Federation grew. So I was a political activist, I became a feminist, and the more I got involved with the union, the more I thought that I could blend some of my interests in greater participation in the activities of the union. I was elected to the position of Assistant Correspondence and Interviewing Officer, a very long title. It really was a welfare officer position. And at that time, the union was quite different to what it is today. All the leading and influential positions, of course, were held by men, despite the fact that 57% of the profession was held by women. Women made up the majority of the teaching service, and yet wherever you looked, all the dominant positions were held by men. That's why I think it's important to understand that the world that I'm talking about was a quite different world to the one that faces people today. In my day, it wasn't just the importance of relying on women, but we had to have male mentors to support and encourage women breaking through. And I was very lucky that I came to the union at a time when, despite the fact there were only a handful of women, among them Cathy Block, my dear friend, who's still a friend after all these years, but Ivor Lancaster was then the secretary of the union. And without his support and encouragement, I don't think I would have gone on further to hold more senior positions in the union. So 10 years after I started teaching at Bankstown Girls, I still remember that, the first day that I arrived there. And of course the serial number, I don't know if you still have serial numbers, but it lives with me forever, 69600328. I can say it in my sleep. 10 years after that first day of teaching, was 1979, the year that I was elected as the first woman General Secretary of the New South Wales Teachers Federation. It took 61 years in Federation's history for the first woman to be elected as General Secretary, and I was very honoured when Council elected me. It was a contested position, and that's important too. I love the Federation because it is democratic. It gives everybody a chance to have a go, and I always say to people, don't be deterred if you don't win the first time around. I remember being defeated in the first time I contested the ballot at Council by someone who didn't last very long in the Federation, but it taught me a good lesson that if you're really keen to do something, don't let the small hurdles stand in your way. So after 61 years, Bob Sharkey, who went on to become the secretary in later years, contested the position, and I defeated Bob in that ballot at Council by quite a sizable majority. I think it was 158 votes to 57. But what it did show was that people were now prepared to accept women on their merit, and I'd had the experience both as a welfare officer, as a union activist, as Ivor's right-hand person. So I felt at that stage that I was on top of the issues that were important for the teaching profession, and that I'd had a good training and good background in my years with the Federation. So here I was with the Pearson Rennie Davey team, being elected as the General Secretary, which was a great achievement. I never saw myself as being apart from other women. I'm very anti the Queen Bee syndrome. I hate women who think they make it just because of their own innate talents, as it were. I've always seen myself as part of a broader collective, and all my achievements have been with the support of women, on behalf of women, and we've all shared in the successes along the way. I was very lucky it was the Federation, because at that time the union movement remained a very male-dominated institution. We were lucky that we had committed feminists working in the union, that we had progressive men supporting us, that we had a history of advances for women long before other unions, even though we'd been affiliated to the Labor Council and the ACTU for decades. We're among the first union to achieve equal pay in 1958 for women in our union. We're a progressive union, we're a large union, about the 12th largest in the whole country. It was by far the largest union at the state level. We had good connections with the Labor Council and with other unions. And we went on to ensure that the issues that we fought for within the Federation also became part of the broader agenda for the trade union movement. So without the Federation, I would never have achieved the other challenges and opportunities that came my way, particularly in the broader union movement and finally at the ACTU. From 75 on, women were leaving their mark very much on the agenda of the Federation, which was terrific. I can remember one case in particular that stands out in my mind. Involved myself and Kathy around the issue of the right of women to return after the period of their maternity leave. You probably don't realise that, you do now know, historically, that even in the federal public service, it took decades for married women to have the right to even work as public servants. In the Federation, we'd made enormous strides. It was a great union in that regard. And it was a militant union. We'd had our first statewide stoppage in 1968. But during my time as secretary, in the 70s, we were known for quite militant action around the issue of extras, teachers being asked to work extra periods, around the issue of class sizes, around staffing. And whenever we called stoppages, they were very well supported. So we had a great record of being able to deliver industrially. Probably people didn't realise at the time that there was still systemic discrimination in many unseen ways against women, and one of those that was really important was the right of women to return at the end of their maternity leave period. The practice had been that the position, when you went on mat leave, the position was filled by a permanent teacher, so you'd have to wait for another appointment, quite unsatisfactory. So having women positions of power meant that you could address some of these issues of systemic discrimination. And Kathy and I did the case of the Commission, which ensured at the end of that successful case that women could have their positions held open for a period of 12 months and have a right of return at the end of that time. So that's just one example. There are many other issues. Of course, the struggle for relief from face-to-face teaching that affected so many primary teachers, predominantly women, was very important. Class size reductions, improvements in superannuation, more security for casual teachers. A lot of those issues came to the fore in that period that I was involved with the Federation. On my return, we had the election of a state Labor government, and a minister by the name of Rodney Cavalier became the Education Minister. Well, I always had some memorable challenges with ministers of education, but one highlight of that period was an industrial campaign that was quite different to the campaigns that we'd run in the past. It was a campaign of defiance. Mr Cavalier, the Education Minister, wanted to institute annual inspections of teachers, the Teacher Efficiency Review. And we thought, well, how are we going to handle this? You can't just have a one-day stoppage and hope it blows over. And we devised a strategy that was so effective, which involved no loss of pay. We just decided that each school by school, would say no to having inspectors coming into the school. And so here we were, involved in a widespread statewide campaign against the teacher efficiency review. We were successful and not one teacher lost 1 cent of pay. So that was a great achievement. But Rodney and I had our differences over issues, but nothing by comparison to Terry Metherell, the Education Minister in the Griner government. Well, poor Mr Metherell, I don't think he'd ever coped with dealing with women, particularly stroppy women. I remember our first deputation to him, and I did what we'd normally do. I had a list of issues that I wanted to pursue on behalf of teachers. That's what I was paid to do. So I came along with my list of issues that I wanted to discuss with him, and he took offence. He said, "This is not the opportunity for you to raise issues. This is my meeting. I've called it, and we'll discuss what I want to discuss." I said, "Well, if that's your attitude, then there's no point my coming to any more deputations if you're not willing for me and the representatives of the union to pursue issues that we think are important." So that was my first and last meeting with the then Minister, Mr Metherell. But of course, Mr Metherell goes down in the history of our union for provoking the biggest community protest that the state had seen, even I think outmatching the numbers that we used to get along to the mobilisations against the Vietnam War. So again, we had to be very creative, and we embarked on a community awareness campaign. So we used the media to ensure that our message got across to people who may not have focused on the issue if it had been just a traditional union dispute. So we broadened it out to make clear that if he had his way, that this would have a disastrous impact on students as well. And we planned for a major rally on August the 17th, 1988, in the Domain, just near Parliament House, because we wanted the politicians to see how serious we were. Of course, none of us had any idea of just how many people would turn up, how many parents would come along, how many students would be there, how many teachers from country regions would be able to get there. We knew that a lot of the regional associations had planned to bring busloads of teachers, but no one could envisage the mighty response we had on the day. It was just phenomenal. I remember walking into the Domain and seeing this sea of people as far as the eye could see. I mean, how could you estimate how many were there? The estimates went as high as 80 to 100,000 people. It was chock-a-block, the Domain. It was just so exhilarating. And I think we sent a clear message to the government that the union was very committed to ensuring that Terry Metherell and the Griner government didn't get its way. There was one sign I remember stood out very clearly, it made me chuckle. There was a teacher with a sign saying, "Come back, Rodney," meaning Rodney Cavalier, "all is forgiven." So whatever the difficulties we'd had with Rodney Cavalier over the teacher efficiency review, it was nothing compared to the terrible agenda of the Griner government led by Terry Metherell. But in the end, we were successful, and the positions through negotiation were restored after a period of time. So it wasn't an immediate victory, but it signalled to the government and to all the political parties that the union was very resolute in its determination and that we had forged very strong bonds and links with the parent organisations, and of course a number of students had come along to participate as well, realising that the changes would be detrimental as far as they were concerned. That rally at the Domain stands out in my memory as really the high point of my tenure both as Secretary and President of the Teachers' Federation. It showed the community that we were a formidable union with great links with the parent organisation, a union that would stand up to whatever political party was in power, whether it was Rodney Cavalier under Labor or Terry Metherell with the Libs, that public education transcended party politics and that we were prepared to have that debate and that campaign, whoever was in government. And I'm pleased to see that passion about public education has continued on in the campaign around the Gonski changes and the fair funding campaign. And when I was the member for Throsby in Parliament, you can rely on the fact that I used every opportunity, both in caucus and in the Parliament, to make clear the importance of public education to the nation's history, to the progress we'd made as a nation, to the fact that it underpinned the democratic ethos of Australia, and that it was a very important avenue for young people like myself who had access to quality public education as a background to taking on the opportunities and challenges that came later in life. So I owe public education, the Teachers Federation, a great deal for some of the successes that I was able to achieve later in life. Oh, the other anecdote, I had a little notebook because I thought it was very important. I was there representing the white collar AXPAR group. It was very important that I knew what went on and that I had notes to report back. And some of the guys were looking very nervously, what's she doing? And a couple of them said at the end of the meeting, what are you doing with that notebook? And I thought, well, what am I going to say? And I thought, I'll put you on notice. I've got this notebook because I'm taking down all the comments and remarks of a sexist nature that are made around this table, because one day I might write a book about what actually goes on at the ACTU executive. So I think in those less than subtle ways, we made the point as women that the world was changing and that it was no longer just going to be a man's world. And even though I was the first, I was going to be the first of many, and that's, of course, the way it has been. And today you've got a female secretary and a female president of the ACTU, so how times change in a very short historical stretch of time. So 1983, the first woman on the executive. Then today we've got a female secretary and a female president. So in a short historical time frame, we've really made a difference. I started off by talking about the world as it was 50 years ago. So I just want you to imagine the huge leaps and bounds and progress we've made in the 50 years since then, when the Federation and the union movement was very much a male-dominated world. So my achievements have been the achievements of the women that fought the battles with me. And the fact that I broke the glass ceiling, I didn't do it for me, I did it for all of us. Yeah, so it's been a really fantastic journey, and one that I've shared with so many fantastic women over the period. I can't mention them all, but I know that you'll be hearing from some of them involved in those early challenges, people like Gail Shelston, our first women's officer, Pam Allen, Darrell Duncan, Kathy Block, if she's there, Murray Muir, Barbara Murphy, unfortunately, who died just recently, was a fantastic role model for younger women. So it's been a fantastic journey. It's one that I've shared with lots of good people. Your challenges are going to be different in this year than mine were, but I want you to know that you're helping to build and maintain a fantastic union. It's always been a democratic, activist, progressive union, a union that's cared about issues beyond working conditions and salary. As important as that is to our members, fighting for a better world and a better society has always been part of our brief, whether it was for Indigenous communities, whether it was in the peace movement, in the Vietnam mobilisations. We've always been there when it mattered and when it counted. In my retirement, even though my mobility is restricted, I'm working with some fantastic women on a couple of other projects to record women's history. Too often we've been written out of history, not in our union, and I'm looking forward to the publication which will tell us the history of 100 women on our 100th anniversary, but in many other areas we've been written out of history as women. There are two projects that I'm involved with. One involves Sarah Kane, a young graduate of the Organising Works program, along with Sally from that era. She's now an academic and she's working on a project about women's voices being heard. And the other is a project with Robin Murphy from the Illawarra, originally from the Steelworks, who's putting together a documentary on the fantastic campaign, the Jobs for Women campaign, that got women employed in a traditionally male-dominated establishment like the Steelworks in the Illawarra. It was a very significant breakthrough at the time. So I'm still very active in terms of continuing my commitment to issues that have always been important to me. I look forward to following the outcomes of the 100-year celebrations of the Federation, and I know that you'll continue to be involved and active in making your mark on the further history of the Teachers' Federation. Thank you.